On this episode of Whitetail Cribs, we're stopping in West Central Illinois to visit with Matt Bartlett. Matt is a union worker by trade, but when he has time off, you can find him in the whitetail woods. Join along as he shares some of his best hunting stories from over the years and check out some incredible Midwest whitetail bucks. If you enjoyed the episode, smash the like button and leave us a comment. Now let's go.
Name's Matt Bartlett. I am from Bushnell, Illinois. I'm a union iron worker by trade and a dad when I'm not working. So here's like my little hangout here at the house. I've got my deck here, got my fenced in yard that Maverick and my dog Cooper can just kind of hang out and play in, and I don't have to worry about them getting hit by a car or anything out here. So I do live in the middle of nowhere, and people love to blow the stop sign that I live on. So let's go ahead and get in the house, take a look around. All right, coming in here to the guest bedroom. Got a nice little laundry basket full of some of the sheds I've found over the years. I've got probably one, if not two more at my parents' house. I just never felt the need to really bring home. This is my first archery buck. I shot him at about 10 yards back, I think I was an 8th grader. So I was pretty pumped over that. He's a nice little 8-pointer and a good way to start out a lifelong obsession. So down here on the floor next to Cooper's toy, I have one of my grounded bucks that I shot at this little place about 15 minutes away from home. Jesse was with me on this particular morning. This was Veterans Day when I shot this deer at, I think it was 17 yards on the ground. We were standing in a pile of junk on a hillside where I shot actually a buck that's on the wall over here. We'll get him in just a second. I also have about another 130 class buck that I shot in 2011 on a place that I don't hunt anymore. We lost that place actually, the same year that I shot this other grounded buck. So it's kind of a sweet deal. That's why I called that deer the redemption buck, and I've said enough about him, so we might as well just go to him first. This is the buck I've been talking about. I lost a farm that we hunted for probably close to 20 years. The landowners just decided they didn't want anybody hunting there anymore, so they kicked us out like right around October 25th. So scramble mode set in, and I went to knocking on doors. So I knocked on this lady's door, and she actually knew my grandmother, so it was pretty much a no-brainer from the start that she was going to let me hunt. But anyway, I never put a camera on the place. I hunted the place. One day after I hung a stand, I actually encountered this buck and missed him with my bow. At about 40 yards, I just shot right over his back. Well, 3 days later, I got done with physical therapy, and I went and hunted across the road, which was the direction that he ran when I shot. But he boasts a 147-inch 10-point frame. I shot him at 40 yards on the ground with no blind in the same spot that I shot that buck that's on the floor. So this buck back here is a buck that I killed when I was a senior in high school. He is right at 160 inches. Directly below him is a deer that I shot several years ago with my bow and never did find. I shot him just a little high. He bled like a stuck hog, and we trailed him, and we just never found him. So the neighbor actually found him that following shed season, and miraculously the rack was still in pristine shape. So he knew that I had shot the deer, got the salvage tag for it, and he gave him to me. So shout out to Tyler Rector for letting me have a deer back that really kind of tore me up. And going over here, this is another buck that I had a couple years of history with. I actually shot him on film as well. I got laid off on a Wednesday, went out and basically called my shot. I told the guys the night before that I was going to go out and kill this deer in the morning, and this is Stan. He's actually another deer we have on our YouTube channel at Last Breath TV, so if you guys want to watch this deer get shot, go ahead and go to our YouTube channel. He's a 6.5-year-old deer, and he was ruling the roost on this pasture that Jesse and I hunt. And I rattled him into 16 yards, stuck him right in the shoulder. He ran 150 yards and he was dead. Directly to my right here is a buck that I shot several years ago also. I shot him with a shotgun at about 60 yards. I wasn't going to shoot the deer just because he looked like a 3.5-year-old deer, but the way he was acting, he was all hunched over. So I could tell something was wrong and he had been shot or crippled or something. So I ended up going ahead and shooting the deer, and come to find out later when I actually walked up to him, he had a bullet hole pass through right just behind his diaphragm, between his diaphragm and his guts. So he had a little bit of gut matter coming out of the one side, so there's a high probability he probably wouldn't have survived. So we'll head on down here and we'll take a look in Maverick's room. Just your typical toddler boy room. He's got all his toys on his toy box. He's got his bed. He's got a whole bookshelf full of stuff that we like to read most nights. Right over here, since he's my firstborn son, he decided he wanted to get my first buck put in his room. I shot this deer back in 2000. It was my second year deer hunting ever. Dad and I were sitting watching a field, and he came out bumping a doe during first gun season, and the rest was history. Let's go here and tool on down the hallway. Coming in here to Maverick's playroom, obviously you can tell I've got a couple really nice bucks mounted here on the wall, a whole bunch of sheds on my fireplace. I shot this deer back in 2012 with archery equipment. I actually snort wheezed and then rattled this deer in to about 22 yards. Shot him, and he only ran about 60 yards and fell over dead. What's really unique about these two deer is I shot them about a mile apart. This deer has very extremely similar characteristics to Fade directly above him. So I'm, me being the guy that I am and knowing things I know about deer and the general area that they are found in, I would like to say that this deer is probably a grandfather to Fade. Because Fade looked just like this on this side as a 3.5-year-old buck. Obviously the DROPTINE wasn't quite as impressive, but he looked just like this. He sat really high and tight off his head. This deer had the same exact deal. Then directly above him, this is Fade. This is a 5.5-year-old deer that I shot last fall. He had really gave Jesse and I the runaround all deer season. We'd had daylight picture after daylight picture after sighting after sighting after sighting, and we could just never get in front of the deer for whatever reason. But he's right at 152 inches, and he's a mainframe 9. He's got just a little fifth point right here on this side. He's got a little kicker on that side. I shot him back in December last year at 52 yards with a bow. Coming over here, I'll go ahead and shut the front door. I've got a full body river otter mounted up here. I caught him at my grandparents' property that we own outside of town here. It's 49.5-inch long river otter. It's a big male. I trapped him and another one, like I said, in the same week. So just one of them things, I was like, you know what, I've never caught one before, so I might as well get it mounted. It ended up being really pretty. So as you can see, I've kind of got him decorated with a whole bunch of pretty substantially sized sheds here. This is actually my biggest set I've ever found. It's off a deer named Mac that I hunted for about 4 or 5 years. He ended up dying as an 8.5-year-old by getting hit by a car shortly after he shed his antlers. But this year right here in particular is the year I shot him with a shotgun. I just never did kill him, obviously. I just hit him just barely low, right below the heart, just in the meat, kind of on his chest. This year he would have scored right at 175 inches with an 18-inch spread, which he was actually a little wider, but I tried to be modest when scoring him. And right here is his 8.5-year-old shed that we ended up finding. Obviously, it's pretty easy to tell with that kickback G2 on both sides that it's the same deer. So it's pretty cool to have that much history with a deer and be able to hunt him for so many years. It's just a really big shame that he ended up getting hit by a car. This right here is probably my favorite shed that I own. I was shed hunting with my grandpa back in 2004, and we came across this shed at a big place we used to be able to hunt in Fulton County. And in 2005, I ended up killing this deer and ended up being the biggest deer I've ever killed in my life. So let's go ahead and go check him out. I've got my full body turkey mount over here, triple bearded one. He's on one of our spring seasons, so if you guys want to see some turkeys get killed, we've got all kinds of content for that as well. This is my wall of giants, I guess you could call it. This is probably some of the best deer that I've ever killed. So I put them in the living room where everybody can see them. So coming over here to my 195 and 5/8 whitetail that I killed when I was an 8th grader. We'll go ahead and put the shed right up beside it so you guys can kind of tell. It's pretty awesome that he was able to actually keep a lot of the points that he had the year before. He matched this one. So he grew this, grew a split. He was 161-inch 10-point, and he had 34 and some change inches of non-typical points. which put him at right at grossing 195 and 5/8, and he netted 191 and 5/8. So he's about as symmetrical as they get for a deer with 22 scoreable points. So coming over here, just right beside him, I have a deer. It's a really beautiful 4-year-old buck that we called Potential. I shot him back in 2015, I think is what it was. Jesse and I started getting pictures of this deer like right at the tail end of October, and he started giving us a routine right away. You know, he's following this cold front, following a certain wind cycle. So every time the weather switched and every time the wind switched a certain direction, this deer was coming in and leaving the next morning in daylight. Well, November 4th rolls around. I think it ended up being the day I killed him. It's hard to tell anymore. But checked the trail camera when we got in the tree. Realized he was in there the night before, and then we had a pretty good indicator that we were going to kill him that next day. And sure as shit, he came in, but he came from the wrong direction. So he ended up leaving that night, and he just made a big loop again. He's also on Last Breath's YouTube channel. I shot him at 16 yards. I never really did score him, but if I were a betting man, he's probably right at 160 just due to the 6x6 frame. He's probably 20 inches wide, and he's got great long beams and that little kicker point. So I'll score him eventually, but he's a good deer. So coming down here, I'm saving the best for last if you couldn't tell. Coming down here, this is the Interstate 10. It's about 140 inch, 141 inch 10 pointer that I shot on the ground at 12 yards. It was a frontal shot, but that's the only shot I had. We called him in to literally 12 yards. I shot him, he ran 60 yards and died. So here's Tilt. I shot Tilt a couple years ago. He was a 5.5-year-old buck that we didn't really have much history with, honestly. He just kind of appeared out of nowhere. If we did have pictures of him the year before, it's really going to be hard to tell just because of this really awkward beam that he had. But it's really cool. I shot him at 28 yards, I think, 29 yards. I was hunting by myself during that time because Jesse wasn't able to get a vacation, but yet another miraculous Illinois whitetail. It's got some really cool character back here on the back of his rack, little point here that didn't quite get an inch, smashed one. And obviously that really funky beam. Phantom showed up early to mid-October, right behind this old lady's house, right next to her barn. We had a trail camera picture of him coming into the scrape, and I about fell out of the truck when we checked the cameras. And then the chase was on, obviously. You know, this is back in 2016, so I was running cameras by then pretty religiously, and was able to figure out by shotgun season that Phantom was on a 9-day loop. So every 9 days, he'd be looping back through, checking the area, because there's 2 or 3 does that kind of live on the area year round, and they never really leave. So every 8 or 9 days, he'd be coming back through, seeing if one was in heat. Well, I finally caught up to him on opening day of gun season. And if you guys want to watch him get laid flat on the dead run, go ahead to our YouTube and check that one out too. And last but most certainly not least, we have Uh-Oh. I hunted Uh-Oh for the better part of a month. I only actually hunted him maybe 3 or 4 times in a month. And finally was able to lay eyes on him right in muzzleloader season back in 2018, and snort wheezed him into about 50 yards and laid the smack down on him on some pretty epic film that Jesse laid down. So if you want to watch this one, that one, about 6 or 8 of these deer in my house. If you want to watch any of them go down, they're on Last Breath TV's YouTube channel. So we're going to get ready to wrap this up and kick you guys out of here. I need to get Maverick fed supper, and we need to get settled down for the evening. So thanks for coming to my house, checking out what I got to show off. Not a lot of people get to see it other than the people that tune into Last Breath and the close friends and family. So hope you guys like checking it out, and check out Last Breath if you want to see more. All right, Jake, it's time for you to head on down the road. Thanks for coming, guys.